So to everybody else on the call, I'll say good afternoon. Welcome to the latest instalment of GL Assessment's Teacher Reflections webinars. My name's Andy Small. I'm a former teacher of 16 years across state and independent sectors. Having joined the company 18 months ago, I now work with our independent schools as part of an assessment insights team, supporting colleagues to get the most out of their data with the main driver to drive school improvement. A few pieces of housekeeping before we begin. Maybe we should have done this ourselves beforehand, but if anybody is experiencing any technical issues, then do share these via the chat function. My colleague Nanette is also on the call and she'll be able to help you. Otherwise, I'd ask that any comments or questions that you have for me or for any of our speakers this afternoon are posted in the Q&A panel only. We do anticipate having some time to respond to questions at the end of the session this afternoon. As you're already aware, the session is being recorded today, and that recording will be shared with you and also with those other colleagues registered but unable to join the call live. Beyond that, I'm really delighted to be able to welcome guests from 2 all through independent sector schools to share their thoughts with us this afternoon. An award-winning co-educational independent day school for children from nursery all the way through to year 11. Ballard School can be found on the outskirts of the New Forest on the Hampshire-Dorset border. And joining us this afternoon is David Dunn, Deputy Head Academic. The school not only makes use of GL Assessment's complete digital solution, but has recently become one of our centres of assessment excellence. So welcome, David, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, thank you.
Nestled on the edge of the Cotswolds in rural Oxfordshire, Cokethorpe School is an independent day school for boys and girls from 4 to 18 years. And joining us today is Nicky Black, head of the junior school at Cokethorpe, and Sophie Dawes, Deputy Director of Studies, with a focus on data in the senior school. And thank you both for joining us today as well.
Pleasure.
The aim of the coming 45 minutes or so is to allow David, Nicky and Sophie to share their experiences of the past 18 months, which have, of course, been pretty challenging for everybody, but also to discuss the important role that assessment has played in that, the impact it's having in their respective schools, and also any future plans for enhancing the way in which assessment data is being used to have an impact at individual, at cohort or whole school level. So if I can come to you first, David, can you perhaps briefly describe your experience of the past year or so in school, how you and your staff team have responded to the challenges of partial school closures, exam cancellations and those sorts of things? And have you observed in your students any significant loss in terms of academic progress? And if you have, how do you know?
Well, obviously, the last 18 months have been a massive challenge to all schools in all phases of education, and 2 lockdowns and 2 sessions of online learning have been a tremendous challenge. But you could also argue the other side is they've probably moved on our teaching and learning significantly. Whilst we might have been teetering on the edge of using Microsoft Teams, etc., etc., we were thrown into it, and some of those things that we've learned, we'll never go back again. You know, online parents' evenings, what a fantastic thing that we've managed from there. Obviously, GCSEs have been cancelled twice now, and we're just in the throes of battling with our teacher assessed grades, the same as everybody else. We've been very fortunate in that we've managed to continue with our assessment cycle with our year groups, even during lockdown. And fascinated to see some of the data that was released by GL Assessment in the autumn term, commenting on regression in learning. And regression is something that Ofsted have been looking at. And we looked at those very favourably, those statistics, and it prompted us to look at our own results with our progress in maths and progress in English. And we compared the results of children over 12 months come along, and it was very interesting that our year group averages were within 5% of them. So we're showing that there's not a lot of regression going on. And in fact, in English, we found that our scores had improved after lockdown than they had done before lockdown. So fingers crossed, maybe, and just maybe, some children did a little bit more reading during lockdown than they might have done with all the other distractions that they have in their lives that currently prevent them from doing so.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. And yeah, our autumn term analysis, I think, that has helped a lot of schools contextualize their results. So that's great to hear that that your experience has actually, in spite of the challenges, been a relatively positive one in terms of outcomes, hopefully. Great, thank you, David. And Sophie, your experiences of each period of lockdown in the upper school at Cokethorpe were quite different, weren't they, in terms of the comparison between the two? Can you elaborate on that at all, please?
Absolutely, Andy. And similar to what David's just said at Ballard's, it really accelerated a move that we were already starting to launch into Teams and OneNote, and starting on a bring your own device policy, which unfortunately has also been delayed. But in terms of the uptake of Teams and OneNote, clearly we were thrown in there in lockdown 1. So we had a hugely accelerated accumulation of technical skills, and for many students that's actually helped them to become more self-reliant and independent. They've got all of their notes in OneNote neatly filed away, and they're quite good at getting what they needed from content libraries. And I don't think after the first lockdown we felt there was a huge difference in progress in the secondary school. However, with the more recent one in January, since then we've really noticed the difference. Clearly it was a big challenge to us to try and teach better on Teams the second time around, because you can't just transport a classroom lesson online and hope that it's going to go quite the same way. But I think in line with a lot of national trends, we found that a lot of the more straightforward and accessible activities and skills like reading comprehension are fairly where we might expect them to be, but some of the more some of the skills that need independence and a lot of learning confidence perhaps have taken a bit of a back seat. So plenty to work with, and clearly actually getting in and getting some data and understanding what's going on is key to understanding what to do next.
Yeah, fab. And I did a little bit of teaching, got myself back into a classroom of sorts, and certainly found that teaching some elements of the maths curriculum were far, far easier over Zoom than others, I have to say. Yeah, I 100% concur with that. And so, Nicky, what in the junior school, talking about little people like my 7-year-old, what did you learn about yourselves and your students in the junior school, and what's your experience been?
Yeah, I've just taken myself off mute. I'm sorry. I hope there isn't too much background noise. I've got pre-prep just outside my door, getting ready to go to the kitchen garden right now. So
lovely. Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, so the experience in the junior school really reflected what both Sophie and David said, really. Our teachers suddenly were so much more capable in terms of their computer usage, because they absolutely had to be, and also really, really keen to embrace change, again, because they've had to. So that's been a real positive, I think. And then in terms of what the children have experienced, almost the opposite to what Sophie said about the independence. Our younger children, although they were having their lessons on Teams, they often had a lot of support from home, the children that we were teaching. So yes, again, very little loss or regression in terms of their learning, but perhaps a little bit less independence. So that's been something that we've been trying to address since we've been back in school. But wholly a positive experience, I think, overall. And yeah, that increase in computer literacy has really made a difference, particularly with things like embedding the new assessment that we've had this year.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. That sounds great. And so if I can move that on a little bit then. So David, you mentioned about decisions that you made that the role of assessment could play, and actually largely continuing with plans as they were. Yeah, what were those decisions, and what were kind of key to you insofar as while students were away from school, and I suspect importantly upon return of all students back into school?
Yeah, well, obviously, Andy, we went into lockdown in March last year, and the summer term is quite a big assessment term, isn't it? You know, we're trying to for annual reports, etc., etc. And we took a deep breath and said, well, let's go for it. Let's try it. And we managed to keep going with our progressive maths, English and science testing by mail merging the codes and sending them out to parents. And children logged on, they've already got the login on their on the system when they log into the school system. And we went for it. And there were some anomalous results. Of course, there were one or two people where parents had maybe had given an unfair advantage, but we could spot those. We could probably have foreseen them, if you want the honest truth. But we went ahead with it. We looked at it. We were able to generate the data that we needed. We were able to write our reports, and we went through, by and large, unscathed and unchanged. And it was remarkable looking back. And of course, then we've replicated that in the second lockdown. But we've actually extended it, and we've done a little bit of testing. Obviously, we couldn't have children to come in for taster days and things like that. So when we were recruiting children, we've been massively oversubscribed because of our online learning program. A lot of maintained school children have looked to come to us based on that. And we've done a bit of testing of pupils before they've come to join us, and that's gone extremely well as well. So people who've hardly ever heard of Ballard, have never heard of GL assessments, all of a sudden were doing GL assessments, and we were getting some good feedback, which helped us to decide which children we thought would benefit from us most, and which ones we needed to be a little bit cautious of, because they may have educational needs that we might not be able to satisfy, basically.
Very interesting. And I suppose, David, because you have been using our assessments a little bit longer, that you had some context for what to anticipate of those students that were in school anyway, and that would have helped then identify those anomalies, so to speak.
Very much so, very much so. And comparing them to the children that are already in the school, Andy, was a very useful exercise, because we were already, with the new Year 7 coming in, we've actually got a whole new class coming in September. So we're going from 3 to 4 classes, and we was able to see where the new children would sit in the new new Year 7, and that's been really helpful for planning and putting groups together, etc., etc.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting. Thanks very much. And so, Nicky, how have you developed the approach to assessment at Cokethorpe over the last 18 months or so, and what have been the key priorities for you in doing so, particularly in the context of what you said already today?
Well, for us, we've used maths and reading assessments previously that have given us standardised scores, but our feeling with those was that the ones that we were using before were perhaps a little bit unambitious for our pupils, and also didn't give us an idea of how those assessments related to what we should be expecting of the children. Which is where we wanted the Cat 4 scores alongside to be able to really measure against what we should be expecting of the children, and have an idea of what their potential is, and whether or not they really were on track for themselves. So we were seeing children who were making fairly steady progress, but we wanted to know if we could be more ambitious for those children. We also wanted to be able to track them through into the senior school, and that was something that we didn't have prior to getting GL. So far we've looked at using Cat 4 with Year 4, Year 5 and Year 6, and actually that's been probably the most significant step for us, has been to share the parent report of the Cat 4 with the parents, and just give them an indication of where they should be and where they're going to be, hopefully by the end of Key Stage 2, and be able to compare that then to their reading assessments, which has been really, really useful.
Right, and that triangulation of the data is a part of the conversations I have every day with schools, and I think at an individual level, as you've just said there, it can be really valuable to know what, when to expect that a little bit more perhaps of a child who may be coasting potentially, and where actually students who might not be necessarily attaining at the heights of others, but actually for themselves, they're doing very, very well. Thank you very much. So yeah, that's great to hear that that's the case. And so Sophie, have there been significant differences then in the senior school with regards to your priorities for how assessment's been used there?
Absolutely. So as Nicky mentioned previously, we've not really been able to compare much across the two schools. And also, I think one of the issues we've had in the past is that it's not necessarily how the children are tested, but how that information is then interpreted and used. And one thing we found hugely helpful, having done, so we've done CAP 4 this year in year 7, year 9 for new joiners, year 10 and year 12. And the reports that we get, obviously we're able to immediately share with classroom teachers. This is the sort of the category of teaching style that this student might fit into, and here are some useful strategies to use with this type of student, as well as obviously the projected grades that we need really to kind of understand how we're teaching them at GCSE and A-level. The visibility of the data across the two schools is really helpful. And obviously this year we've been trying out different types of assessment. So for example, we've just run some pass testing with year 9, but before deciding to do that, we were able to just go straight in and have a look at the pass testing, which was done in the junior school last term, and to discuss with Nicky and her staff the outcomes of that and how useful it had been. We decided to run a trial of progress tests in English and maths in November with year 8, and that was quite interesting as well. So we're actually going to be moving forward with some more week after next with year 7 and year 8 to be able to compare that data to the previous progress tests, and also, as Nicky mentioned, to the CAP 4 to get an idea of areas in which they are on track or perhaps we might need to pay more attention to.
Okay, great. And in some of our conversations before, I think you spoke about how some of that data has helped developments in the school and facilitate some change in terms of the direction that your curriculum is taking as well. Is that right? Absolutely. One of the key things that came out of the English progress tests for year 8 was that they were really, really strong at reading comprehension, which we partly anticipated because it is something that is taught quite strongly at Cokethorpe, but that they were not really doing as well in spelling, punctuation and grammar. And clearly that's quite an important building block across the whole curriculum for all of the GCSE courses. And so that has obviously, our English department immediately reacted to that and implemented a big focus on spelling, punctuation and grammar. But I think the awareness that at this point this was lacking, we still don't know whether that was partly to do with lockdown or partly to do with the focus of their education. But what we're now going to be doing looking forwards is obviously to run those progress tests across from year 4 right through into year 9 for progress tests English and maths, so that we can actually see at what point perhaps we might need to change the teaching and make sure that we are catching everything for each cohort. Has the depth in the reporting there then been able to help you or hopefully will help you identify then where those priority year groups potentially going to be? Or absolutely. And you know, the depth of the detail has been absolutely essential for the class teachers, and also those students who are getting extra learning support. Their learning support teachers have gone right through the reports and seen some distinct patterns in the types of questions that they were stumbling with, and that's really helped to inform the work that they're doing with them. They found them really useful. That's great. That's great. And David, you too have also used the data from the progress test series to implement some changes at Ballard, so I understand. Can you describe that for us as well, please?
I can, but having listened to Nicky here briefly, that's exactly the conversation, Nicky, that I had with our head of lower prep this morning. He said exactly that. More than the data, the implications for learning and teaching were like gold dust to the teachers in that area of the school. and they were able to get in and put their interventions in place. So it's exactly the same experience that we're having, particularly at the lower end of our school and the new FAD, which is really interesting to hear.
Yeah, great.
Experience is concerned, we went off with progress in maths and progress in English, and we were expecting there to be implications for learning for the children, but I wasn't quite expecting to see the significance of implications for teaching. The first thing we noticed with our progress for maths results were that the mental maths scores were considerably lower than the second part of the test. And I dug into that a little bit more deeply, went to the maths department, and I discovered that virtually very little of our teaching was done without a calculator in year 6, 7 and 8. And part of that is geared to the fact that we're aiming towards an IGCSE in maths, which is all calculator based. But it really worried me, it really concerned me. So we've implemented an intensive program of mental maths, which takes place in the lessons, but also during their form time once a week, to try and improve our level of skills and also, of course, our level of confidence for the children in their mental maths. So a significant improvement as a direct result, really, of implementing the testing.
That's great. It's great that it's fed back into the teaching cycle like that, and obviously then the learning as well. And hopefully that will be further evidenced through your summer term assessments as well. Let's hope so. Nicky, you mentioned the value in cognitive abilities testing in the junior school, but assessing reading has been quite an important part of your strategy, hasn't it?
Yeah, so we've been working on reading as it's quite a broad area to be working on for improvement. Reading's been a real focus for us over the last couple of years in the school. And again, previously we were working with standardised scores, but of course that doesn't give you, as David was saying, very much to work on in terms of how we should change our teaching. So one of the things that we've had from the group reading test, of course, is just the much more in-depth information that we get in the reports. And it's been brilliant for the professional conversation in the junior school and the conversation that's come out of it, because teachers have genuinely found the reports fascinating, and we'll look at a group report and then dig down and look at the individual reports as well. And so that's had a huge impact. And then again, the cross-referencing against the CATs has been invaluable. Great.
So that sort of data literacy, if you like, and the interest in the data, you're finding that's developing all the time in the staff team.
Hugely, and that's something that we want to obviously continue to progress as we get a little bit more. So we're just in our first year of using GL with the junior school, so something that we want to see more of as we go on.
And so perhaps you've sort of answered the next question already, but I wonder how you see the role of assessment developing at the school now in sort of the coming years.
Yeah, I think the use of PASS as well, and that was something I think that raised a few eyebrows when we first said, okay, we're going to assess the children's attitude to school in the same way that we assess their English or their maths, and yet that's been invaluable too. And again, something that staff have found really, really fascinating and has caused them to change their approach. So for me, it's about embedding the programme that we've got, because we haven't done the progress in English and maths test yet. Well, those will be for the summer term. So we've got the embedding of it to do, and then so much of it then is going to be about tracking that data. I'm sure Sophie will have more to say on that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Before you do, Sophie, just add that the pupil attitude surveys data was probably the one piece of information that I didn't need to bend anybody's arm to look at in the staff room that I was last in. It was fascinating to see everybody's interest in that. Sophie, if you could pick up the baton there, then I mean, how do you see the programmes of developing over the next 12 months or so at the upper school?
So I already mentioned that we're going to run the progress test through Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. We've obviously now done a really successful trial of the PASS survey with Year 9, which came out with some really positive and some pause for thought results that we've obviously been following up with through our pastoral system with the housemasters and tutors. We're now looking to how we roll out that PASS testing across different year groups, which ones to target and how often we'll do that. But really, I think the big thing for us going forwards is going to be about getting that oversight and continuity through the school, and therefore, you know, being able to react and adapt and communicate so much better across the years and with the junior school, that actually that's going to enable us to get a really good overall picture as well as going into the detail.
Great. It feels a bit like that transition will evolve a little bit with some help from the data that you're now getting.
Absolutely. So as Nicky mentioned, this is our first year on GL. This year in the senior school, we've been using a real mix of data. We've obviously got some year groups on the old system and some on the new, but coming into next year, most of the pupils will have a CAT score, and also we'll have some previous progress test score. The year 7s coming up, we'll have data from the junior school, and we're really looking forward to having that visibility and having that knowledge, which is going to be a lot more useful than anything we've had so far.
Yeah, that's great. And the fact that transition from one system to another within the space of what 12-13 months will hopefully have been almost complete is that's great to hear. And I know that David, you've made that transition yourself as well, and you're a little bit further down the line perhaps with the use of GL's assessment package, but how do you see it developing over the coming months and years at Ballard?
Well, definitely, you know, moving across to GL, it's fantastic to hear staff in different staff rooms in different areas of the school all using the same language, assessment language. And you know, we had a very fragmented approach to assessment before we came over, but now we've got one system throughout the whole school. It's to hear teachers using the same language to talk about children as they move through, and as parents get used to it as well. It's a winner all the way down the line. Obviously, we got busy with a few things that we've had to hold back on. We've got to get involved in a few more combination reports. We're looking to get involved in those next. We were almost there, but it got held back. But really exciting for me, and one of the main reasons that I chose to swap over was the value-added tool. And we'll be using that for the first time this summer. Once we get the teacher-assessed grades, we'll be putting those into the system and looking at how they compare to the CAT 4 grades. And I'm really looking forward to that and the data that will create, and that will build up in our database as the years go on, and that will be a major development, I believe. I really do.
That's great, and I think we've done well to get to 3 without mentioning tags. It was inevitable, wasn't it? But yeah, once you do have those GCSE results, the ability to be able to look at that versus CAT 4 data historically as well, and chart your value added is hopefully going to be a really important part of what you get from it. That's great, thank you for that. And so perhaps just one last question to each of you, if you don't mind. I know that we've got lots of schools watching and listening, and others who will pick up the recording as well. So I wonder whether there's a single piece of advice that you might have for any school using assessments. They may be GL assessments, they may be others, but what would you consider to be sort of a key thing to share with anybody listening here now? Maybe I could come to you first, Nicky, if that's okay.
Yeah, mine, I feel slightly foolish that it seems so obvious when I say it out loud, but I would just say prepare your staff really well for the change, especially if it's on an online platform where they haven't been using online previously. So I found the GL assessment website so intuitive and easy to manage that I probably wrongly assumed that all the teachers that I worked with would as well. And we have one little girl in year 2 in particular who was a really, really good reader. And the teachers knew that she was a good reader, but didn't know quite how good she was. So one of my staff actually screenshotted the screen because they hadn't quite anticipated that the assessment was going to be reactive, and couldn't believe that I was giving them an assessment that would ask her to read such advanced sentences. And at that point, I realised that we perhaps hadn't utilised the training that we might have put in place beforehand. So yeah, slightly ashamed to admit that one, but yeah, just perhaps don't assume that everyone will quickly slide over to an online system.
Yeah, and I think in any staff room in any school in the country, you'd have different perspectives and different experiences. So I don't think you need to beat yourself up over that at all. But it's good advice, I'm sure. Absolutely. David, perhaps I can come to you next.
Very, very similar again to Nicky. We were full of excitement and wanted to get stuck into this straight away. So we jumped in with both feet, created a plethora of data, sent all that out to the teachers, but then realized we had to take a step backwards and start to drill down exactly what we wanted to get from these tests, the CAT 4s and from the progress tests, and start to have meetings with departments and areas of the school and talk them through it and show exactly what data, what the most important data at that moment in time was. So my piece of advice would be to plan the implementation and know what you're looking for. It will expand because there's so much of it and it's fascinating as you get into it, but you need to know a couple of easy wins, I think, when you're planning it, so that the staff gather their confidence in it. And then you'll have the meeting out of your hand. They'll be waiting for the next assessment to compare them to the last ones. And you've won then with assessment. And as I say, it'll be properly embedded into the school. So do plan it to make sure you get a couple of easy wins, because there's a lot of data out there.
Yeah, that is so true, I think. And yeah, I mean, are you able to give us an insight into what those easy wins were at Ballard, if you can, or what you think might be?
Without singling out departments, the maths department took to it like ducks to water, and they loved it and had spreadsheets all over the place. A lot of time with the English department to talk them through exactly what it meant, and once they realised, all of a sudden they were data rich, and comparisons with English and maths then were very easy to make when you're looking at different children. So it was sort of trying to get equality across the different departments. Sure. And look at that from a pupil perspective, and show where they were where they were doing well in both, or well in one and not so well in the other. And the implications then, of course, for the other departments coming in behind them. We look at English and maths results as predictors for what might go on in geography, history, and the rest of it. So it's broadening it out, isn't it? Starting small and broadening it out.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what you say as well about being clear about what it is you want to get out of it. So any assessment, any data should ideally help inform some sort of decision making, I think, and what are those decisions you're going to be making, and therefore which data can help you the most. That's great. Thank you, David. And Sophie, any advice from you?
I've got two, if I may.
Oh, of course.
I think the first one is never assume that you won't learn something by doing some testing. Obviously, we need to have a reason for doing the testing in the first place, but I think there are certain elements of things that we've tested this year that we really weren't expecting to find anything from a part of it. And actually it has thrown up things we weren't expecting, which clearly is one of the reasons why we do the testing in the first place, to find out what we don't know. The other advice really is to work out how you are going to put the GL data together with your own internal school data and any external data. So for us, the key thing has been putting the past data, which obviously gives us the student's viewpoint, with their CAT data, which tells us about their baseline ability, along with our internal assessments and internal report data, and also the effort grading that is done by the teachers, which is obviously their viewpoint of how much effort and what kind of effort the pupils are putting in. And putting all of that together creates a four-dimensional sort of picture that we can actually really use to understand what's going on. And just looking at two pieces of that data in isolation just don't give you enough information to really understand what's happening, what's needed, and what to explore next.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I think you're absolutely right that it will sit alongside so much other information that schools have, and it's important contextualization, of course. Absolutely. Well, thank you.
One of the things that we did on the back of the past was we looked at, in particular, the pupils who had rated themselves really low for effort, where there was a massive discrepancy between that and the teachers thought that they were working really hard. and then to actually get the tutors to go into that and understand where that discrepancy was. And equally, we had quite a few in the reverse. They thought they were working really hard and the teachers didn't. And sometimes that is about their interpretation of it, but also the type of effort that they're putting in, and obviously learning to work smarter. That has been really useful.
Yeah, no, Sophie, that's really interesting, and pass, I mean, I've said it already, haven't we? It does give so much insight, I think, into things that perhaps as teachers we like to think we know, but don't always get under the skin of entirely. That has been such fascinating insight from all of you. Thank you so much. I'm sure that everybody listening and anybody picking up the recording as well will probably have hundreds of questions. We do have one or two that have come in whilst we're speaking, and if anybody else does have any questions that they'd like to ask, then please do. The first one here is from Paul, who asks if the speakers are using paper or online for their progress testing. I think I'm right in saying that all three are using digital tests. Is that right? Does anybody want to correct me there?
We did the ones in October. We used the paper tests.
Mm-hmm.
And I would absolutely recommend doing the online ones because there's a lot less administration, and then the immediate usability of the answers. So with the paper tests, I felt like I had to do some write a report around the data that came out. Mm-hmm. Whereas obviously everything that comes out of test-wise is already in a format that you can put in front of any teacher, parent, if you want to, with the students, and that analysis is already done, the words are already in there, and I would absolutely recommend going with online, which is what we're doing going forwards.
And Paul does say that they are considering making that change, and so I think what you've just said there is interesting. I would also add that the paper tests can work very well for some students versus the digital. But
we do, Andy, use the online testing, but there will always be 2 or 3 children or 2 or 3 parents of children who will request paper copies for a variety of different reasons, and we facilitate that. And very interestingly, with our lowest year 9 maths set, the recent tests that we did, they all did the online test. They all complained about the mental maths. So we gave them the paper test 3 days later, and there was no difference in the results.
Okay, yeah, and there is a lot of work that goes into making sure that the outcomes you get are very reflective of the individual, regardless of which media you use. But that's an interesting insight. I didn't realise you'd done that, David. So thank you for sharing that. It's great. Another question we have here is around data analysis, and I think it's probably more one for me than it is for you, but if any of you have any of the speakers here have looked at our autumn analysis, then do feel free to chip in. What data analysis conclusions have GL made in regards to how students in independent schools were affected by lockdown? One of the things that I'll signpost shortly is a news area of our website, and on that we do have some reports, one of which is a report into our autumn term analysis of test results across the country, both in state and independent schools, also Northern Ireland and international as well we looked at, and the results were quite interesting. It did suggest that independent schools, certainly where progress tests in maths were concerned particularly, but also in English, independently schooled students weren't necessarily as affected in terms of any change in scores over time. There was also a suggestion that girls may have been more affected than boys in that regard as well. So if anybody's interested in reading a bit about how this autumn terms data, when many of our schools were testing, compares to the previous summer, so 15 months previous, and also that summer versus the previous summer in terms of change as well, then I'd certainly recommend going to our website and downloading that report. I think it makes for very interesting reading. one more question. I think we've probably got time for one more. From a practical point of view, do the speakers have advice on the organisation and the administration? For example, do departments set up sittings and generate reports themselves, or is that something that's maybe more centralised? It's maybe I could come to you, Sophie, to share your experience of that.
Yes, and obviously my role is to deal with and manage all student performance data. So I've actually taken oversight of this. So I will set up all the assessments that the senior school pupils are doing, and liaise with the relevant departments about those. So that works for us. That also means that I have all the data centrally held, that the communication, because obviously communication of maths results is not just relevant to the maths departments. There are other departments as well who are keenly interested in that. And so for us, holding it centrally and operating it centrally works.
That's great. And how's that work in the lower school, Nicky? Is there a sort of single?
They're actually with the junior school, because they're mostly taught by the same teachers. So again, I oversee it all for the junior school, and then the class teachers administer the tests, and then the reports all come in, and I get all their class teachers to look at all of their reports, no matter whether it's English or maths, whether they teach it or not, because it's part of that picture of the whole child, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, one thing that I reflect on around my own practice as assessment lead and in a prep school down here on the South Coast was that I held a lot of data and had an oversight of all of that. And over time, it was really, really important to develop that such that staff took ownership of it as much as possible as well. So it's a really important thing. And David, have you got anything to add on the administration side of the test?
Yeah, we can test whole year groups at a time. Our years 9, 10 and 11 all have their own devices in school. So it's relatively straightforward to have an assessment week, a revision week, followed by an assessment week, of which 3 of those tests will be the GL tests, maths, English and science, generate the codes. The children all do the test at the same time. Obviously then we generate the data. We then share the data into a shared area, so that departments can get hold of any of it. We generate the report for teachers as well, for everybody, so that's all in a shared area that they can get hold of. Lower down, it does tend to be a little bit more class-based, but some of it's a little bit more regular testing anyway. So the NGRT stuff is done once a term, and class teachers do that when they feel their children are ready. But we're looking at 2 testing points in any given academic year in any year group. And it works that way because the children have their own devices in the senior school, and in years 6, 7 and 8 we're able to get them all around a PC in our 3 computer suites, so we're able to get them all to do it at the same time, and that makes it much more straightforward.
Great, thank you for that. There has been one other question wants to come in, but I think it's more for me, which is around any analysis of summer term results, and whether they would also break down into sort of independent and state separately. And our hope is, Kerry, thank you for your question. Our hope is that were we to dig down into the data over the summer and identify results of significance, that we would report that probably in a similar format. But ultimately, it depends on what we do find. I think we should probably leave it there for now. Thank you again, Nicky, Sophie and David, for such interesting contributions this afternoon. Really, really great. Before we do finish, if anybody does have any other questions, do please pop them in the chat now, or send them my way. If any do remain unanswered, then I'll endeavour to get an email out in the coming days. If anybody would like to share their own experiences of lockdown in the past 18 months, please do also email. The autumn term analysis on the impact of COVID-19 on attainment, our recent words of encouragement, reading report, and lots and lots of other content can be found on the news pages of our new website. We also have a dedicated support hub on which is a wealth of information to help schools make the most of their assessments. If you do already make use of GL's tests and surveys, then my Assessment Insights colleagues and I would be very happy to arrange an online call such that we can discuss your school's data in depth, and you can find our email address on screen at the top right there. If there are any additional assessments you'd like to learn more about, contact me directly. Again, my email is on screen. And finally, we are continually looking at ways in which we can develop our assessments, but of course, we do rely upon schools to support us in that endeavour by way of trialling new question types and papers. So while some schools go down a formal trialling partnership route, others support us on a more ad hoc basis. So we'd be delighted if anybody listening now were willing to support us with that. Not only would you be in receipt of your students' results, but we do also offer other incentives as well in the form of Amazon or John Lewis vouchers in some instances, or credit against your TestWise account. So do let me know if you'd be interested in this as well. But otherwise, all that remains for me to do is to thank our speakers again. Thank you for your attendance, and yeah, from all of us at GL, wish you all a very relaxing half-term break when it arrives, because I know that it is very, very richly deserved. So thank you, Nicky, David and Sophie, and everybody else joining us as well. Thank you.